Good morning, folks. Today is Tuesday, July 16th, 2025. Welcome to the Post Morning Show, the unaffiliated follow up to Mark Halperin's two-way morning meeting with Sean Spicer and Dan Tarantine. Today's topics: Senate votes on the NPR PBS cuts. Second topic will be about Christians in Syria as well as other minorities. Starting off with the Senate votes, voting on NPR and PBS cuts. This is from Newsmax. The link is in the description, the YouTube show description. This week, the Senate is considering stripping over $500 million in funding for NPR and PBS, with over $1 billion to be cut from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Conservative critics have long considered NPR, PBS, and their parent, CBP, I think that's the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, to be left-wing propaganda outlets funded with taxpayer dollars. Trump administration officials see the funding as corporate welfare for outlets that can attract private donors and advertisers. The White House issued a fact sheet in May 2025 stating that Trump's executive order would end the taxpayer subsidization of biased media by prohibiting CBP funds from flowing to PBS and NPR. Supporters of NPR and PBS have no need to worry if the funding does get cut. Federal funding amounts to only 2% of NPR's budget and 15% of PBS's, according to the New York Times. Given that last factoid, I don't see what the hubbub is about, that the bulk of funding doesn't come from the government, so what's the big deal? We are in the age of start your own YouTube channel, and here on the Post Morning Show, we encourage just that sort of truly affirmative action. Duke, with your hand up, please go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I listened to a lot of NPR because in the car I listen to talk radio, and I'm too cheap to buy Sirius. So NPR's and plus when you're driving around the mountains up here, radio signal can be very difficult to come by. So I can speak to now I call myself an independent, but I do lean right, and I can tell you that NPR is up with both with their commercial and the people that they interview, the people that they talk to, and their moderators are all very left leaning. I don't think the government needs to be supporting that left or right. But I will say that during the hurricane back in September, the NPR, which I didn't own a radio, I had to go to Walmart and buy the actual last analog radio, and a lot of people were in that situation. But NPR, the affiliate station there, did an outstanding job of keeping us up to date on what was going on, and when radio was all you have to rely on, it becomes very important. Other radio stations we could pick up, but they didn't give us the news like the NPR station did. So and also I agree that's a very small percentage of their budget. I do think it should be taken away. The way that NPR raises money is they have a campaign every quarter to get their listeners to contribute money, and basically they turn it off and you listen to them beg for money until they get their amount of money, and
Right.
then they turn it back on. So that's their fundraising platform.
Yeah, you'll see some like show on like history, like, oh, this is so interesting, I've never heard this before, and then there comes the plug for the fundraising, right?
As soon as you contribute money, we're going to turn that on for you.
Thanks for that, Duke. So just for folks joining us, we're talking about Congress voting on the budget cuts, NPR, PBS, what have you. And we also mentioned that it's a small amount that comes from the government. I forget the figure I quoted. What was it? About 15% or less. Vincent, with your hand up.
Oh yeah, great to hear from you all. So you have to look at the history of NPR. So public broadcasting was introduced to America by Edward R. Murrow in 1965. So in 1965, obviously we had no cable, or there was only way to watch TV was off an antenna. So in most parts of the country, and some parts, they only had CBS, NBC, and ABC. And then they eventually had PBS. And then, you had uh, UHF channels. So somebody like me, as a younger adult, a young guy, I started. You could watch Firing Line with William Buckley, and all these political shows that were discussing, you know, very long form conversations. And they weren't just political shows. And then eventually Sesame Street came on in 1969. By that time, I was already 12, so I never watched it. But it offered an avenue to people who, there was only three networks at that time. So as time went on and on and on, obviously, cable TV came in the 70s. And by 1998, more people were watching cable than over the air. So cable finally overtook the over the air stations. So, like a lot of things in America, PBS was really needed at the time in the 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s, but eventually it wasn't needed because there's so much access to information and programming at other places. So, the government's spending about $700 million for PBS and NPR. And like, so there's a lot of people in Congress that feel that one of the billionaires should just write the check. And this is what happened with WHO. WHO, on Trump's first day in office, he wrote an executive order saying, we're not paying WHO the $500 million. Well, then what happened? Bloomberg, who's worth over $100 million, said Bloomberg will mail the check to the 500 million for WHO America's participation. So there's a lot of members of Congress that just firmly believe that one of these billionaires that's worth hundreds of millions of dollars should just subsidize the 700 million for PBS and NPR and get it off the backs of the taxpayers when you have a $37 trillion national debt. So, and by the way, I'm going to be having the Honorable David M. Walker, former Controller General to George Herbert Walker Bush and Bill Clinton, on my webinar at 2:00, and we're going to be long form discussion of the $37 trillion national debt and where we're going in the future. So if anybody is interested, and I put the link on your
On the Facebook,
website.
I think on the
Yeah,
Facebook group, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Feel
I
free to
did.
drop it in the Zoom chat as well, Vincent. Thank you for that.
Yeah,
And
thanks.
Andre, please go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I've been out and about, but heard the conversation. With respect to my good friend Vincent, the two counterpoints are, well, several counterpoints to why not cut PBS or NPR. NPR, which has a separate line item budget of $300 million, and then Corporation for Public Broadcasting gets budgetary funds to send to PBS stations, the vast majority of whom are self-reliant, but it's small town markets that rely on federal funding. So when we're talking about cutting PBS funding, it's not New York, Los Angeles, or other those cities. It's because they make that money from the millionaires. It's the small cities that have their PBS stations cut. And why is that important? Because if Bloomberg were to send a check, then Bloomberg gets to tell them what to put on the television. That's his right. And if it's the government that's the dole, we have a right as a people through Congress to mandate what's allowed and what's not allowed. And that's why people still rely on PBS for things that aren't hyper active. When you want to put something on for your children, it's not distracting, it's not Blues Clues, it's something more sedate like an Arthur, something without flashing images. These are things that parents and Maha parents especially really care about. So I find it odd that we're cutting this. It's $300 million for NPR, which is their yearly budget, and then a similar amount for the bulk of the PBS stations that get that money. But we've extended the tax cuts that will now lose us $4.5 trillion over the next 5 years minimum. So again, somewhere there should be a happy medium. And I think if you ask the public, they can probably say you can probably do exactly what Vincent was saying about having the rich people write a check. Just have, the top 1% of the 1% of the 1% have a 1% increase in their tax, and done. But that's not how we did it. So it'll be a topic for debate going forward.
Oh, and I just want to say one thing. I don't advocate the cutting. I just was explaining the ideology of the Republicans that want to cut it. And I think I was telling Aaron or someone else that when Bill Moyers died, I looked at he was a great man, and I had watched many of his long form Frontline that he produced with his wife, and after he died, I looked at. Many people have said to me, why do you know so much about like Iran Contra and numerous issues in our country? And I've said because I've watched about 200 documentaries, and then I looked back after in his obituary, and they listed, and I had watched every Frontline that was on PBS that Mr. Moyers had produced. So, it's interesting how much I had watched PBS since 1965. And I mentioned this to Mark too. I mean, I was one of these kids that would watch Firing Line every week with, Bill Buckley. And, my vocabulary was increased by watching him. I mean, he said the word sycophant when I was about 14 when I was watching it, and I then immediately looked up sycophant. And then he would say banal or hackney. I didn't know what these words meant, and I looked up. So my vocabulary was increased significantly by watching PBS.
Okay. Thank you,
So
Vincent.
no,
We have-
yeah. So and I agree with my esteemed colleague Andre. It hurts people in rural areas.
Okay.
So
Okay. We have
yeah.
perhaps two and a half in favor of the stations. Dean from Ohio.
Yeah, I don't see it hurting rural areas, especially in today's day and age with the way that you can get it. Although, admittedly, I still have the local WKSU, Northeast Ohio. There's a bunch of those stations, and I do listen to it. I just don't see the need to fund it anymore. I do find it interesting as it goes into its death throes that the the left in general, all present company excluded, but the left in general would like to discuss flyover country, and this is the reason why they want to keep um, the stations. I'd also like to. I understand the argument that my good buddy from New York, Andre. You didn't know we were good buddies, did you?
How dare you? How dare
Yeah,
you?
right. No, so two things can be true. Yes, the tax cuts are in play. I'm not looking at it as a savings. I'm looking at it more as a there is not a need for it anymore. And I want to take that ideological. I think a lot of it can and should um, work on its own or be funded on its own or go out into the marketplace on its own. I don't see a need, and this is for many years, as it was in the past. I don't see a need for it in the future because of all there's plenty of places to get your news now, and those avenues will also have anything that's really good, which I believe the PBS, a lot of it is. What do I watch? That outer space one. It's like a 9-minute segment about space and science on YouTube. They'll find a way to stay afloat.
Thank you for that, Dean. And the outer space, I'll plug NASA TV. I find myself tuning in from time to time. Duke from North Carolina. Gonna unmute yourself there, Duke. I'll click the button. Hopefully we didn't click it at the same time, but go ahead and unmute yourself, Duke. Let's see. Might be the iPad there. Okay, maybe Duke stepped away. Wesley?
Sorry, sorry, I was muted there. I'm not convinced that NPR in rural areas is of any concern at all. And I would think in a lot of rural areas, and in the one I'm in particular, I mean, NPR is a byword because of their style guide, the way that they mandate speech, the way that they try to control people's minds by the words that they use. And I mean, they delved politically so much so they got into the political realm far more than I think Andre. Like I'm unsure if you realize how offensive that is to people to be told that they can't get published unless they use a certain pronoun and things of that nature. NPR should have never waded into those waters, and they did. So I have very little warmth toward their being funded by taxpayer dollars, especially with the national debt being.
Thank you for that, Wesley. Andre?
Yeah, so just doing a quick search for news articles about rural America. Smoky Hills PBS said that it would be devastated. It reaches 71 counties in Kansas City, in Kansas, and would not be able to go forward with that cut. It's basically repeated across the country. So what are we cutting? We're not cutting NPR writing standards, and all newspapers get to have that have an editorial consensus on that. But the thing is, we get to change that. Like, we could actually have a vote in Congress to say that NPR shouldn't mandate this thing or that thing. We don't do that. Basically, we're saying, okay, we have this right to change it. Okay, we're going to get rid of the entire thing, and we're just going to rely on corporate media. Corporate media, which I remind everybody, has been consolidating over the last decade, right? We know that local stations aren't owned locally anymore. Sinclair owns over 800 of them. It's just one corporation doing this and that. We have less newspapers in our major cities. We have even less newspapers in our local rural areas. And so if we're saying that we don't want there to be an outlet for local independent, either news stories or any of the programming that we all agree is great and should continue, anything by Ken Burns, anything that Frontline does, PBS NewsHour and their open debates, which we all love. These are things that don't necessarily get put on corporate media, and definitely not on local news anymore, because local news is so dominated by advertising that it doesn't have a chance to do extended, longer term discussions. So where are these rural stories supposed to happen? Not to mention, the only place you're going to get local debates is on PBS station, PBS stations across the country. That's the only stations that are going to air local mayoral political debates. So we're just going to shut that down at this point, basically by these budget cuts. And we're expecting whom to be in charge of airing that for us.
I mean, they can just live stream it on Twitter.
Sure.
Right.
Well, actually, Andre, we will invite any local mayoral candidates onto the show, Zoran, etc. Please join us.
Okay. No, the live streaming on Twitter is something that person with the phone does. Who does all the production around it?
Yeah, that's a good question.
No, and I know I didn't have my hand raised, but I'm going to bring up. I know it's anecdotal, but like in New York, and what Andre is saying, in New York City, there was an all new station, 880, all new CBS 880. So I started listening to that station in 1967 when it came on the air, and I was still listening to the station. Even my daughter's like, "Are you the last person listening to an AM all news station?" Well, I'm a news junkie. Well, the station went off the air last year. It now, so as a 9/11 first responder, they would call me to do an interview on the radio. Well, now the only people that call me to do an interview about 9/11 are these PBS stations. So in the local PBS station is at Sacred Heart University in Fairfield, right next to where I live. Only PBS stations call me to do 9/11, interviews about 9/11, because the other news stations, there's only one in New York City. Right, Andre? I mean, it's insane. It's really, I mean,
that was a corporate news station. It was run by corporate. There's no money in it, so they changed to an all sports format.
Yeah, it's an ESPN now, and I now, it's like I miss turning on 880 to listen to CBS, the continuous news. But once again, they used to call me to interview me to be on the air. The only people that call me to be interviewed on the air, or my other 9/11 colleagues, are PBS stations.
Okay. No, we understand that, Vincent. Appreciate that. Duke, with your hand up.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I just wanted to say, I agree with Andre, and I think there is probably a use for it, but you got to move to the middle. I mean, if the government is giving you money to present unbiased news, then you can't constantly, you can't constantly lean left. And like I said, maybe it's just my radio station that I listen to. I don't think so, but maybe. But they lean too far one way. That's it.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Duke. And unless there's any last thoughts on this,
I'll add one thing, because I'm not wedded to everything has to stay the same way it's always been. So maybe my thing underlying it is the same thing with, like, when Trump said we're going to get rid of the Obamacare and we'll come up with something new. I think that a good model of government should be, let's not get rid of something without proposing what the other thing could be. And it could be, Wes, it could be something that's online only for maybe 4 programs that everybody really likes, And I think that would alleviate some people's concern. Like, we're going to keep on doing Ken Burns. We're going to keep on doing Arthur and Sesame Street, and it'll be on this YouTube channel or what have you. And we have just cut X amount of money from keeping these local news stations around, something. But I think for me, it's the issue of we're going to eliminate everything. We know that people don't like that, but we're not even going to propose something else.
I agree, Andre, and it did come in very handy during the hurricane. I have to admit.
Yeah, it could be a case of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. We don't want to do that, but I do empathize with Wesley seeing, I mean, the pronouns whole thing was atrocious. And then Big Bird promoting the vaccine, like, whoa, 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 whoa. Kids show, medical advice, that's a whole nother thing. And so it's, you know, government run, grocery stores, government run, news talking. It just, can it be done? We'll see. We'll see how this thing rolls out. But I appreciate everyone's comments on that. We're going to move on to the next topic, which is the situation of Christians in Syria in 2025, marked by a dramatic decline in their numbers. This is from the New York Post. Sorry, actually, the link is incorrect. I'll update that. Before the civil war in 2011, Christians comprised about 10% of Syria's population, around 1.5 million. But by 2022 to 2025 estimates, they now make up less than 2%, with as few as 300,000 remaining. The situation's not getting... sorry, actually, the link is incorrect. I'll update that. Okay, hold on for a second, folks. I had some feedback here. Sorry. Clicking around things. One last article. The first one was from, I'll have to look that again. Sorry about that. Syria post-Assad Alawite minority faces uncertainty under Islamist rebel control. Syria's coup was supported by Chomsky, Owen Jones, George Monbiot, Yanis Varoufakis, Gilbert Akhtar, and numerous Jacobin contributors. Syrian security forces continue to humiliate Druze men by forcibly shaving off their mustaches. That's from an X post, and again, I'll update those links. So that's just a little bit. It's hard for me to look into Syria because I kind of know the history there, at least my personal take on it. Daryl was commenting on things a little bit earlier. So people want to, any curiosity about what's going on in Syria, the Christian situation, are people aware? I will open it up to the group. I know this is a sensitive topic, but I believe it's important for us to talk about it.
I'll start off. It's unfortunate Yakov, is that how you pronounce it? He left. Probably doesn't want to talk to hear from me. But the situation that's happening right now, if you're not aware, is there are some radical groups in Syria that are like aligned with the government, supposedly, maybe funded. It seems like this guy who's in charge of Syria is using these militant groups to keep order. But recently they've been going to these Druze is like I believe they're mostly Christian minority group in Syria. They've been massacred. I saw that maybe some 250 people were killed just in the last couple of days, just rounded up and shot. But now you have a situation where there are Druze people in Israel who are now going into into Syria with like high-powered weaponry, like just citizens, and I guess joining up with militias there. I don't know what their intention is, but and now Israel, Netanyahu just announced like about 2 hours ago that the IDF is going to be going in, the Air Force is going to go in, and they don't want these Israeli Druze people going in there because I think they don't want any more hostages or anything. So it's a developing situation. I think what we may be seeing is the further destruction of Syria. It's going to turn into another sectarian conflict, and I think Israel is going to use this to their advantage, as they always do. They see this they sow this chaos and then take advantage of it.
Appreciate that, Daryl. Yeah, it's I've seen maps, people drawing up of just splitting up Syria and all these ethnic groups, and I just don't know how people have the stomach for that. Like, we're talking about ICE being attacked by the same mentality of people that want to say, well, okay, it's not America. We should have Azatlan, or we should have a group for, carve out for this group or that group. And it seems like it's being applied to Syria. Well, let's carve it up, and somehow you're going to have segregated ethnic groups, and that is, I don't know, better for the people.
We need Assad back. That's what we need. We need to bring Assad back from Russia and say, hey, you know what? We made a huge mistake. You be the strong guy again.
That's not happening. That's
I know that's not happening. I'm just saying, they should. in a utopian world, they just bring Assad back and be like, we made a mistake.
Dean, did you want to? I jumped in for a second there.
No, I look. This was brought to my attention with either Yakov or Daryl's comments in the main show, and I'm just trying to find what's a good source of data for this. Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on.
A good source of data for who?
For the unrest in Syria. The only headline I've got right now is from Fox News that Israel strikes Syria's military headquarters as the regime clashes with Druze or Druzy civilians.
Yeah, it's something that's happening like as we're sitting here. So it's not something that has filtered through to Western press. You know, a lot of the Western press, they like source things from Israel, like Israeli media, and then they decide whether they write about it. Like there's really not a lot of good on the ground in the mainstream media. You have to go to the alternative media.
Daryl, correct me if I'm wrong. You seem to be more connected than on this, but I read reports that the current Syrian government was saying that the Druze it was minor skirmishes, and it was between the Druze and the Bedouins in that area as far as it goes. It wasn't like a massive uprising or slaughter or whatever.
Yeah, well,
is that ringing a bell or no?
I think it's the fog of war right now kind of situation. I've seen videos on X of Druzy citizens, like Israeli citizens, crossing over the border with weapons. I know there's been reports of like 200 something people who were killed. You know, I take all that stuff with a grain of salt because it's hard to get the exact details like we're talking about. But
well, if this headline is true, then it's been escalated. I mean, if they're striking in Damascus now,
I would again, point to the statement by Netanyahu. My phone's inside. I don't know. It's on Twitter. Netanyahu just posted a warning, basically saying, "Hey, don't go into Syria if you're Druzy because the IDF's going to take care of it." Basically, so there's definitely something happened. It's hard to say all the exact numbers.
4 hours ago. 4 hours ago, the IDF struck the entrance of the Syrian regime's military headquarters in the area of Damascus in Syria. Netanyahu, do you put it on Twitter, you said?
Yeah, if I had my phone, I'd pull it. I just had it on there.
It says the current escalation began on Sunday when members of an armed Bedouin tribe attacked and robbed a Druze man along Sudawai's main highway. I'm butchering that. The incident triggered a cycle of retaliatory attacks between Bedouin tribes and Druze armed factions. Nearly 100 people have been killed in 2 days of deadly clashes between Syrian troops, Bedouin tribes, and Druze militias. Jesus Christ. The violence represents a continuation of long-standing feuds. Okay, so this is just cracking. It's going along the fault lines that are already there anyway. That aren't. Anyway, sorry. Go ahead.
So there's one name I want to inject, which is Erdogan, and the reason I want to mention him, I'll say my friend, I've never met him, but Kevork Almasian, right? I mentioned him before. Syriana Analysis. He has a Turkish fellow on. They have an interesting geopolitical discussion, but I imagine because the guest is from Turkey, right? It's kind of then a blind spot on Turkey. Erdogan led the whole operation on Syria back to 2010, 2012. And so without that Erdogan ankle, what is going on with Turkey? It's kind of hard. I believe Turkey is the elephant in the room, okay? Maybe I would say Israel was then, or Netanyahu specifically, was then riding that wave, but I do not believe it was actually Netanyahu up front and center. It was Erdogan again.
Yeah.
I will just cite that in Turkey, you had ISIS merch you could buy. Okay, so just imagine walking into your 7-Eleven. Oh, there's a bunch of ISIS merch. That's odd. And then there were embassies also opened up. And you had mainstream news talk folks in Turkey saying, oh, ISIS, these are our Muslim brothers. Why should we condemn them? So that is something that I feel like where can you go in a space to talk Turkey? No pun intended there, but you're not going to find much of that in the content.
Well, I think their main concerns seem to be protecting the Turk groups. And there's like Turkish people, like ethnic groups in northern Syria, and also they hate the Kurds, so that they have a score to settle with the Kurds in Syria. I think that's their primary motivation. And now I agree with you that they seem to be the ones who really installed this HST guy. He's in charge of Syria now. But Israel played a hand in destabilizing Syria, and then they just take advantage of the situation. I mean, they've seized even more land. I forget the name of the mountain, Mount Hebron. Yeah. So, this Druzy situation is just like another perfect moment where Israel could be like, well, there's Druzy people, there's Israelis that are Druzy. Like, hey, we got to do something. And I wouldn't be surprised if you see them seize more.
Well, and just, I mean, to be in the shoes of the Alawites, that's Assad's, the Shia minority sect or whatever, right? Assad did a reconciliation with Erdogan where they were shaking hands just like a year or two ago. So that really
but there was an oil pipeline or a gas pipeline that Turkey wanted to bring through, and Assad was like not playing ball on that. So that's another reason why they wanted him gone. There's so many. It's so many political. It's really not about the religious thing. The religious thing are like fanatics that are pawns in the.
Right. It's the Pipelanistan religion. If people.
Yeah, you're exactly right. It's all about the economics and the politics. It has very little to do with the religion. It's just, yeah.
Let's bring in Duke with the beautiful background photo.
Thank you. And I've just got a question. Was it the Druze that were working with our military?
I think the Syrian Democratic Forces, and there were some Kurdish factions.
Okay, maybe it was the Kurds.
I forget the name of the Kurdish group, but yeah, we were definitely working with the Kurds up in the north.
Okay.
Yeah, there was the SDF, Syrian Democratic Forces, but they all got killed. Like the Islamists killed them all, basically, or they joined the Islamists.
Right.
And took all their weaponry, which we gave the SDF. Okay, we gave them all the guns and weapons, and the Islamists just came in and took it.
we're good at giving guns away.
Yeah, we're really good at that. Really good at it.
Yeah, there's some infamous photos with the Islamists standing in front of USAID tanks, and then we don't know. I don't know if the latest in the Taliban.
USAID tanks. That's hilarious.
Tents. TEN.
Oh, tents. Yeah.
Fox News is running that Israel strikes.
Yeah.
Syrian capital. Here's Frey Yanks.
Well, I think Israel. It's advantageous for them not to have a strong Syrian government, because then Israel could just do whatever they want. They can operate to the fullest extent that they feel that they need to. If there was a strong Syrian central government that could actually protect Syria and the Syrian people, that's not what Israel wants. Okay.
Well, so, when we talk about the nations, also then we're assuming a monolithic, right? That everyone. So it could be Netanyahu, it could be a faction with Likud. There was a New York Times article where Netanyahu and Assad, there was a treaty in the works, splitting the Golan or whatnot, but that was prior to the Arab Spring, and then that thing erupted, and the situation hasn't been the same. On our Facebook group, I posted a photo of Syria like 1920s, and it's men in ties and suits, and now today it's men with beards and AK rifles. So that is really a troubling situation. Before we wrap up this topic, were there any other final thoughts? Did people want to add it?
You guys might have already covered it, but I thought I saw a headline that said that the White House asked Israel to stop, and Israel said okay, but apparently that's not happening. It sounds
I
like.
didn't see
Well,
that.
and I will comment on the chat. So Andre, I mentioned Mother Miriam Agnes. I mean, this is where it gets very difficult, right, to sort out what is real from what is fake. But when that at least one of these chemical gas attacks occurred, it was all Islamist media, first of all, and here are the dead children. And then she circles them, and then the next day here they are running around playing around. So in this age of some things are fake, some things are real, synthetic terror, we had ISIS with green screen backgrounds and the whole desert scenery and cameras, and then they're doing not a real behead. I mean, is it a real beheading? Is it staged? This is what's very difficult. And when we talk about, I would welcome anyone that anti-Assad, like from that area, bring them on the show. But then we're going to see their background. It's always Islamist. You know, that's what I've found, at least in my research. So it would be great to have some primary sources on the show, you know, and talk about their experience and what's real and you know what's not. I think that's going to round this out on this topic. There were questions. I believe Duke wanted a Ukraine update. So there's one gentleman I will go to for that if he is available.
Yeah. What can we say? We were very bullish on people who saw that the kind of Elbridge Colby, JD Vance people kind of messed up 2 weeks ago because they pissed Trump off with stopping the weapons going to Ukraine. They didn't tell him. And then there was a lot of cleanup for that. Marco Rubio had been doing some talks, kept pointing out to Lavrov in his meeting in Kuala Lumpur that, you know, you're killing your own people, 100,000 Russian soldiers dead this year alone. Why are you doing this? So we were bullish that President Trump wanted to push Russia to finally have some peace talks because they backed off every single time. And especially they backed off for every demand of President Trump to have a ceasefire. And that didn't happen. President Trump teased a big announcement on Monday. The announcement was, part one was just restating the fact that the weapons that were stopped are going through. So any of the Patriot missiles that he says are being delivered ASAP, that was already from the budget money of 2024. There's nothing new there. So anything on the trucks that was supposed to be delivered is going through. The other thing was what General Kellogg was negotiating with President Zelensky in Rome. General Kellogg is now in Ukraine and will finally be able to go visit the front line. The Trump White House banned him from doing that in February because that was the time that JD Vance was having his speech in Munich and saying we're pulling back, etc. This time, Keith Kellogg is going to be able to see the frontline positions and let President Trump know exactly what's happening. So in regards to that, we're going to have the negotiations of Kellogg and Zelensky. We're going to have European countries find money to pay for additional weapons for Ukraine. That's great. That's an America First MAGA version of it. As I've said here before, it adds more bureaucracy because another country needs to call its parliament together to do an appropriations bill for money to then transfer that to the United States. And then the United States transfers weapons to that country because it's a one-to-one arrangement. And then that country has a separate arrangement to transfer weapons to Ukraine. So it'll add some time. I don't anticipate any weapons purchased under this plan to be delivered before Labor Day, but I'd be happy to be proved wrong. And then the other thing, when I mentioned the end of August and September, is that President Trump announced that he would put 100% secondary tariffs, which is any country that does business with the banned entities in Russia, the banned companies, the banned people who supply their military rockets with chips, et cetera. So the secondary tariffs will be 100%, but they're not going to start for 50 days, which to basically people in the military sector is like, okay, so you told President Putin he could do anything he wants for 50 days, and then you might do something after the fact, which is very similar to what Biden did when he didn't want to put sanctions on the pipelines before the war. He was saying, we're just going to wait until after the fact. So, and that was something that President Trump criticized then. So it's very confusing about why there's a 50-day delay, especially since it's been reported that President Putin told President Trump in his phone call on July 3rd that he has a 60-day plan to escalate their attacks on Ukraine for the next 60 days, which we all have been talking about an increased level of troops and attacks this summer, which always happens because it's the best time to attack. It's not the rainy season or the cold season. So that's the most confusing part, is the fact that President Trump said, we're not going to do anything about a full court press, like Professor Kenny and I have been talking about, escalating sanctions. We're going to give Putin 50 days. Putin has already announced he's going to increase his attacks in the next 60 days. And to top it all off, the sanctions bill in the Senate, which has 87 sponsors and 50 sponsors in the House, President Trump said that he has told the Senate to stop working on that. So even Congress doesn't have a say in this situation now. In the meantime, the NDAA is working its way. So the defense authorization bill, there is 500 million for it, in 500 million in weapon supplies for Ukraine in the Senate version, 300 in the House version as of yesterday, and that'll work its way towards reconciliation sometime after people come back from the recess in August. So middle of September, early October vote for the final passage.
Thank you for that update, Andre. Daryl?
Yeah, I was going to comment on the 50 days. And I'm glad, Andre, you brought it up, that Russia has been planning this summer offensive like they always do. And yeah, Putin told Trump that he had a 60-day offensive. So Trump comes out, oh yeah, it's 10 days into the offensive. Oh yeah, 50 days left. Like, in a lot of ways, Trump's getting played. Like, Trump has deluded himself into thinking like, oh, I can come in here and change the calculus. It's really not going to happen. I think if there's a chance for a ceasefire, maybe at the end of the offensive, depending on if Russia feels like it's achieved any of its goals. But and to the secondary tariffs, I don't know how effective that's really going to be. I mean, when everybody put tariffs on the oil sales, like India and China just secretly kept buying the oil. Like, how are you going to stop that? There's going to have to be like extreme enforcement. And as like the microchips for the missiles, I mean, those are being provided by China. So China can just create like a new shell company that gets sanctioned that just exists to sell the microchips to Russia. So I just don't. There's not very many cards that Trump can play. I don't know what they're going to do. I don't know how they're going to pressure Putin to come to the table. I just don't see it unless there's a massive escalation.
Can I just clarify about the sanctions? So the EU just did its 17th and 18th round of sanctions in this spring, the 18th most recently. And the reason is that every time we put on sanctions against specific banks or corporations, Russia then changes like Daryl was talking about the oil. They just change the registration of the different shadow fleet to a different company, and a different company that does insurance for them, et cetera. So that's why the EU has been updating it this year. The United States had been doing it through the end of the Biden administration with the updates. We just haven't had an update this year. So that would be one issue. That would be one reason to pass new sanctions, because as Daryl said, okay, we put sanction on and the oil is still flowing. It's because you need to keep doing the whack-a-mole if you're doing sanctions.
Okay, thank you for all that. ML?
I was going to say this is pure speculation, but I can't help but wonder if Trump is actually finally starting to use partners and allies in this thing. It's going to take a lot of maneuvering, but coming from a year ago, I understand it's Biden versus Trump. I get that, but the fact that instead of having constant headlines about the EU and Trump and NATO being all on different pages or whatever, now they seem to be aligned, and I can't help but wonder if the overall plan at the end of these 50 days or whatever, Daryl, you might be surprised. I don't know. Now you could be right. Butt kiss could come from this or something very serious. I wonder if Trump is going to be leveraging more of those partners, like where it's not us on the front end of that's pushing the spear forward, so to speak. It's going to be a confluence of those countries. I also can't help but think that Turkey will be pivotal no matter what happens with this because we don't have to go. All we have to do there, obviously, and correct me if I'm wrong, Andre, but it 17 batteries or was it 17 launchers that were announced? Or what I wasn't clear
No,
on that.
the 17 is that Trump mentioned when he was sitting next to the head of NATO that there's a country that has 17 systems. So launchers, not individual rockets. We don't know what country he was talking about, if that's
Right.
entirely accurate. But the rhetorical push in Europe is, why the hell are you guys keeping those here in the West? You're not, in a point.
Using
If
them.
you're saying that Russia is going to invade you one day, stop them now in Ukraine and
Right.
send it all there, and then replenish yourselves
Right.
to what you were talking about. But also, I'd like to support your thing where I'm in the same camp, ML. Like, Trump likes to punch people in the face. He doesn't like long wars,
Right.
but he does like to punch people in the face overwhelmingly. He likes Fordo. He likes Syria when he did that drop.
Right.
So I would not put it past him to coordinate something that's a punch in the face with European allies.
Well, and I keep talking about this, but I can't help. I don't know what part it's going to play in the next year, and I'm probably wrong, but Azerbaijan and some other states are already there. It doesn't take much to cause a situation to like where Russia has to respond with their troops, not necessarily a war, but like all we have to do is cause a little bit more chaos in that area and like take Russia's eye off the ball. And of course, the offset with that would be it's going to drive more of those countries closer to China too. I mean, we at best in some of those stand states we have technical assistance for their infrastructure or whatever. We don't really have too much capital, but again, Azerbaijan is one of the rare things that we could, potentially that in Turkey and I don't know, see what kind of things that we could take from that. But anyway, I don't know, but we'll see.
Okay. Thank you, guys. Peter?
Yeah. So, excuse me. I posted in the chat a Twitter thread from Dan Caldwell, the former DoD advisor, about the way that this is essentially offloading a lot of the financial burden on paying for these weapons from the US onto Europe. And he's been a pretty vocal Ukraine aid skeptic in the past, but from his perspective, he sees that as a less negative way for the US to go about doing that. Now he still has significant reservations about it, which I would tend to agree with. But I think that's it's good perspective. Now, as far as the 50 days thing, with regards to what Daryl was saying, I honestly don't, and you can take this as a positive or a negative, depending on how you see things. But I get the sense, because of the 50 days thing coinciding with the call with Putin and the fact that, it's and whether it's systems or bad, like I have trouble keeping track of that sometimes. But I do think ultimately, the long and short of it is I get the sense that Trump wants to appear to be he doesn't want to do things that will escalate further. Like there were reports that he himself contradicted that he told Zelensky to strike Moscow, and then he personally explicitly denied that yesterday. But I get the sense that it's a lot of this is about perception, about being seen. I think that he fears. And there was also another article, I forget where it was, but about how like he does still like, he's been talking about Putin a lot more in public, but this reporting was that he does still view Zelensky as well to be an obstacle to achieving a peace deal. I get the sense that he he does not want to have to continue to deal with this conflict anymore, but he also does not want to be seen to do anything or have a lack of action that would cause a Afghanistan 2021 style event to happen on his watch, especially before the midterms. And I think that's the primary, one of the primary. I mean, I think he does want to end the conflict on its, just because he wants to end the conflict. But I think he also significantly fears that kind of event happening on his watch, particularly before the midterms.
Thank you for that, Peter. Wesley?
Andre, are you still there?
I'm here. I'm sorry. I'm just taking a break from camera stuff today.
No, I just got a question for you. So, do you have information on the amount of Ukrainian and Russian soldiers, casualty numbers, just on average in a day, month? I mean, how bad is it?
Well, the just casualty isn't at the tip of my fingers. I know that overall and this is when you go to like international stuff like UN and other monitors, the Red Cross and stuff. Ukraine has lost civilian and military personnel up to 600,000 at the median. I think some Ukrainian government people will try to push that down to like half of that. Some Russian sources will tell you it's over 1 million, but the middle of the road is up to 600,000 casualties, which is injured and killed. Russia is from the same kind of sources, will be at 1.25 million casualties since 2022. And then Rubio and Trump have been pushing this number of 100,000 killed this year of Russian soldiers, 100,000, which they work out to being 150 dead Russian soldiers a day. I don't really know when he comes up, and he always increases the number by 1,000 every day when President Trump is like 3,500 people dead a day or keeps escalating. So
that's a lot of Russian soldiers dead.
It is a
How many
huge
do they
amount.
have?
Yeah.
How many do they have? That's more than our whole military.
Yep. Yeah. What was somebody saying about casualties? The 1.25 million casualties of Russia. People were trying to estimate like how to explain that to Americans, like half of Long Island or half of this particular state. But that's a lot of people to be out of commission.
Yep. But unreal. I mean, that has to hurt Russia's military capability long term, right?
I think that has been mentioned numerous times on the Hill in terms of people who support making sure Ukraine isn't defeated, which is we've been arming Ukraine for a fraction of a percent, and through that process, one of our biggest strategic enemies has been downgraded significantly. There's no way they're going to replenish any of those tanks anymore. Their entire Soviet stockpiles of just bullets is gone, and then you're talking about the human resources as well. I don't know what the comparison is to Afghanistan and World War II, but it's definitely exceeded it.
Right. All right. Thank you.
Okay, Peter.
Yeah, so I would have to pull up all the different statements and sources that I've looked at, but I don't buy the 100,000 Russians killed this year number, and this is the reason. I believe that from what Ukrainian military officials themselves have said about where they estimate current Russian troop levels and what they estimate the recruitment numbers, and this is contract soldiers generally, they haven't done a major conscription wave since late 2022, if I recall. It just doesn't make sense. Math isn't my strong suit, and yeah, okay, like I sure media zona, right? Like
This is the when they go out and search for people's names in different villages across the country to try to figure out who's still an active person and who's not. And so this is a crowdsourced OSINT thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would have to take a look at that, but you're not seeing. I don't think that if the casualty numbers were that high, I don't think that you would see the recruitment numbers that, again, like, Ukrainian sources themselves estimate that they are. You're not seeing the, resorting to more, conscription programs like you saw in late 2022. I would have to look at the Mediazona thing and the OSINT, which, I would say has had its issues in the past in various theaters around the world, but it just doesn't seem logical to me. So um, that's that's where I am on that.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Daryl?
Yeah, I'm with Peter. I think that the idea that Russia has lost 1.5 million people, I think is hard to, on a number wise, like even figure, like, how is that possible? That's true. If they've been losing over 1,000 people every single day since the war started. I just don't think that's realistic. And I agree. Like, Russia has not really done a lot of conscription. They get volunteers. So
No,
there's really,
really, the videos you've seen out of Ukraine, trust me, they are there in Russia as well, of taking people off the street. It's a real thing.
well, there has been conscription in Russia, but it's been far more limited than the Ukrainian side. They've been getting a lot of volunteers on the Russian side, and I think these numbers that get put out about how many Russians have died, it plays into this like larger, like, psychological warfare thing that always is used against Russia, which is, oh, they're so ineffective. All they can do is just human wave attacks. Like, that's a refrain that we've always heard in our culture, even like going back to like World War II. Like, how did they beat the Soviets or the Nazis? Like, oh, human wave attacks. And you've seen that kind of language be said again all throughout this war. Oh, why is Russia advancing? A human wave. They're just throwing North Koreans into it. So along with that, I think inflating or attempts to inflate the number of Russians that have been killed tries to play into that sort of like psychological warfare. I do think a lot of Russians have died. I don't think we really even know how many people have died. It's difficult to, because you can go to 10 different sources and every single one is going to tell you a different number. I would be hesitant to think that really 1.5 million people would have truly died, soldiers. Yeah, that's all I wanted to comment on.
Okay, thank you for that, Daryl. Duke?
Yeah, and don't forget, this is, and I think it's pretty well established that they lost somewhere between 9 and 11 million during World War II, using a similar strategy. And I don't think Putin has much consideration for human life. I don't think we actually know the number, but I think it's pretty high from everything that I've read, and I've read a good bit on it. And using the World War II tactics and the fact that I think Ukraine has come up with some very unique strategies for unaliving people, especially if you find them in a group. So. And don't forget about when the conscription first started. They began to empty their prisons. I think they've used all that they can get out of there, but they lost several million draft age males exiting the country as quickly as they could when all this first started up, and it was a tremendous brain drain on the country.
I got a question, Duke. I'm sorry, this is just really brief, but the term unalive, when did that become common vernacular instead of saying killed?
If you can't use killed or dead or anything like that on a couple of social media sites, or they'll pull your comment down. So that's probably the first time I had ever used it.
Probably
in an adult conversation.
Probably NPR made that popular, right, Andre? I'm kidding.
Exactly. Now, actually, it's TikTok. If you're going to make a comment on TikTok, you can't use the word gun or weapon. They refer to it as pew pew.
What? Like, come
And
on.
then,
What?
yeah, seriously, they'll pull your because I did a couple of comments and got nasty notes from the bot that polices the comment section.
So,
But that's where it came from.
Social credit score at work there. Here, Peter, let's get Peter that joke.
As far as again to the casualty numbers and various things. First of all, with regards to, and I did some quick looking up to reconfirm this, the idea that several million have left Russia since the war started is not true. If you look at whether it's sources like Moscow Times, which is like a dissident anti-Putin media outlet that reports. I mean, they're not really based in Russia anymore. I think they're based in Latvia or somewhere. But they report on things in Russia from an anti-Putin perspective. Their number is that as of 2024, around 650,000 wartime emigres remain abroad. If you want to take the higher number, the UK Ministry of Defense estimates in 2022 there were 1.3 million departures. Now you could reconcile those two figures by saying that some have gone back, and then if you look at what anti-Putin voices within Russia say about how the war has been conducted. Now, you could say that this just means that they're even more crazy, I suppose. But a lot of the criticisms one of the main criticisms that Putin has gotten domestically within Russia is that he has actually been overly cautious in various respects, but including not willing, that he's been overly cautious and he's not using the sort of World War II Stalin era tactics, and people, they object to that. They want a more the most significant. Yes, they want to see a more aggressive approach. So there's there's a fog of war thing going on here. There's lots of different information out there. I don't think that I really know, I don't think that I really know, I always take, when I read things from whatever perspective, I'm always like this, I always try to critically analyze how this could be wrong or off base. But I think that with regards to specifically to the, idea of people having left, I think that you can find a consensus that it's not, in the multiple millions. I think there's a pretty solid consensus there.
Okay, thank you for that, Peter. ML, with our last comments for the
I
live.
think, yeah, thank you. I think that it goes in Russia's favor. It doesn't matter if it's 1.1, 1.2, 1.5, da 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 da. It doesn't matter. I mean, to Russia it might matter. I don't know. It's up to them. But the amount of people that have died on the Russian side is just going to be a feather in Putin's cap, no matter what the number is or isn't. Doesn't matter because they fight. There is a tremendous disconnect between Moscow and the front lines. So insofar as how their hierarchy works, their officers are a lot closer on the front lines. How those are being done. They don't really care as long as they get an inch or a whatever here or there, and it's brutal. And the Russians fight a completely different style and type of war than the West does, than the U.S. does, than whatever. Ukraine's adapting, and as I said before on Sunday, the way that the front lines are working is the way that they're fighting the war is completely different than it was 3 months ago, than it was 6 months ago, than it was a year ago, et cetera, et cetera. So it's undeniable that there have been hundreds of thousands of Russians that have died, if not more. And that Russia is a master of disinformation and using any kind of which way they can to sow doubt or whatever. So it serves as a cautionary tale of look, you mess with Russia and you're going to get all, we're not going to stop until we achieve our aims or whatever, which is essentially the grinding down of the Ukrainian armed forces, like the conventional military and government forces therein. But uh, as far as the gains, like again, yes, they're making gains, but those gains aren't like they're not 50 kilometers at a time. It's more like five. And even if you add in all those things, they still Ukraine. It's like a very long wick. Ukraine is in no danger of being overran at any stage, any particular stage. Now, if they were to bring in a tactical nuke and risk that, that's a whole different ball game. And I wouldn't put it past Putin to use one, to be honest. But if he does, that opens up an invitation for the world to come in and do something. I'm not saying that's going to happen or whatever. I'm just saying it wouldn't surprise me. But kind of doesn't matter if it's 1.5 or 1 million or sub 900. Doesn't matter. The whole point is they fight a completely different style of warfare, and they're not you can call it meat wave or human, it doesn't matter. They're adapting every single month, and it's every month that goes forward, it's a completely different scale and version of the warfare. I mean, on the line of contact, it's just it's not going to end soon. And I mean that's kind of the whole point of taking the front part of the tiger that's Ukraine or that's Russia and nailing down each paw into Ukraine to where they cannot respond in other parts of their backyard. That would be it can't just be weapons to Ukraine. It has to be another. It has to be a broader strategy to bring Russia to heel if we ever can. I don't know. I do know that from this whole time, now people may poo-poo this, but Ukraine hasn't had a crisis of confidence in their leadership as far as it goes for that. What you saw, the Wagner dude try to roll up toward Moscow, that happened. That took everybody by surprise. So what will that happen again? I don't know. Who knows? Who knows? But the Putin does have to. He does have a whole big Russian Federation to look after, and the more that we can kind of poke him here and poke him there, whether it's us or Russia or other states, that's it's gonna be the key. It's not just going to be on the battle line until and unless Russia decides to ceasefire. We all know that that's not going to happen. They're just not going to. They're not. They've already said we're not doing a ceasefire. Period. We're not stopping until we want to stop. Anyway.
Appreciate that, ML. And we're going to wrap up here. Then please, folks, hang out with us post live.
Anyone off, but that's a wrap. Remember, you can catch us live Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. Eastern. It's your chance to join the conversation and have your voice heard. Just check the link in the description or visit americastalk.show. Together, through the free exchange of ideas, we can truly make America great again. Don't miss out. Tune in and be part of the dialogue.